Welcome back to another incredible episode of On the Subject. I'm your host, Michael Villardo, and we have an incredibly esteemed guest today, Jared Grusd. This is an incredible leader. He was the Chief Strategy Officer at Spotify, Snapchat. Now he's the co-founder of an incredible edtech company, Ethically. We're so excited to have him here today, have him share his story in education. And keep in mind, he's also an adjunct professor, so we're super privileged to be able to learn from him today. Thank you for joining the show today, Jared.
Psyched to be here. And great office space.
Yes, great office space. So we're in LA. You're an LA kid. Ended up spending a lot of time all throughout the world. What was education like for you in LA back when you went to high school, and how has it changed so much now that you're a parent with kids in LA?
Well, let me take a step back. So one part of my story is that I'm an immigrant. And so my family moved here from South Africa. And
Amazing.
I think like a lot of immigrants, the question is like, why are you here? And what could your path to success look like? And how do you even think about success? And for me, without having any connections or really knowing much, I just always assumed the path to wherever I wanted to get would be just do really well in school. And so one thing that got instilled in me is, in fact, do really well in school. And so I've always used education, frankly speaking, as a means towards like just trying to figure out how I can make it in life. So there's always been an end goal to what education is. But then as you sort of get into it, it kind of takes you on a journey in many different places.
Well, so you came to LA from South Africa at what age?
I was really young, though. I was only
That's so
1 year
cool.
old.
I was going to say I never recognized an accent. So this is new information to me.
Yeah,
all the
it's new
listeners.
information. I unfortunately did not get the accent. That would have been helpful in many things in life, but unfortunately did not get that.
I love that. It's such a cool part of your story. And so to all the listeners out there, Jared and I share this in common. We both are Quakers. We both went to Penn. How was that? How did you get into Penn? How did you apply to Penn? What was that, especially coming from an immigrant family? And so cool to hear that part of your story. I'm sure you had to navigate a lot of the collegiate process on your own and being able to figure out, these are the schools of my dreams. This is where I want to go. And, how was that?
So in high school, my goal, and I went to high school here in Los Angeles, my goal was to go to UCLA. And I lived fairly close to UCLA, and frankly, the only two schools I'd ever been to in life was UCLA and USC. And I'm like, all right, those are the choices. And I'm like, if I can get into either one of those, that would be the best thing in the world. And as I went through the college application process, I did apply to UCLA. I also applied to Berkeley and a few other schools. One of them was Penn. And when I was accepted to UCLA and to Berkeley, I'm like, okay, which one should I go to? And I had a really good friend who was in high school with me whose father had gone to Penn. And he called me aside one day and he's like, Jared, all these schools are great, but having like been part of LA, I think there's something to going to school back east, seeing a different culture. There's something really special about Penn specifically, and I just think you'd be doing yourself justice by going to Penn. So he was really the most successful parent of all my friends, and so I listened to him and chose to go to Penn really based on his influence.
And what was your major at Penn?
So I majored in English and studied quite a bit of philosophy as well.
I love that. And so when you talk about how you were able to go to Penn and be able to move away from home, can you talk about what an experience it is, especially as an 18, 19-year-old young person, being able to go into a new environment? It's so important, and it really challenges you to make new friends and be exposed to different types of cultures. I'm sure it was very different than it was in Los Angeles. What did you learn about yourself during that time?
At the most basic level, dealing with winter.
Yes, it's a lot colder in Philly than LA.
And it just so happens in my freshman year, like every once in a while, maybe due to climate change or other reasons, you get these like crazy hot summers or crazy snowy winters. And the very first winter at Penn while I was there was one of those like crazy cold and snowy winters. And so I realized this is going to take a little bit of adjustment. But it was awesome. My freshman roommate was from Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Wow.
And came to Penn without speaking much English. And so we formed this great relationship, and he sort of opened my world to all of the international students who are at Penn. And obviously there's a lot of folks from the East Coast, and just getting a sense of like how diverse the crowd was and all the different experiences that led people really to the same dorm room in Philadelphia. It was really, amazing to me.
So what dorm were you in?
Oh, I was in the quad,
Yes,
which is
you
great,
got the good stroke of luck there.
and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
did get a
yeah.
good stroke of luck. Although now I hear it's going through a big renovation.
Yeah, now the new Hill House is apparently where
Uh,
everyone wants to be.
and I was on the Spruce Street side, but the specific dorm, I don't
Hey,
really remember.
yeah, no, that's I love being able to hear the Philadelphian stories, and we share that memory together. It's a lot of fun, and so something that's really unique about your education, I think a lot of our listeners would appreciate, is that you have both your MBA and JD. Incredible student, very ambitious. Why did you decide to get a master's in business and a law degree? And for you, which one has done more for you, would you say?
Yeah, so I loved Penn. I loved studying what I studied. And as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time studying like literature and philosophy and history and those things. And especially at a school like Penn, which is really pre-professional, many of my friends were very clear they were going to become bankers or
Yep.
go on Wall Street in some way, shape, or form. And that just didn't appeal to me at the time. And then at some point, as I was set to graduate, I had this little bit of a holy cow moment, which like, what am I actually going to do? And what have I really learned in college? And I wasn't sure I could fully answer that question. I thought I was smart. I thought I had done well, but I'm like, is any of this transferable? And and I wasn't clear on what the answer is. One of the reasons why I applied to law school is I thought it'd be intrinsically interesting. Two, it'd give me, frankly speaking, an opportunity to actually channel some of the skills, which is like being good at reading and good at writing, into something that you can earn a living for. And my goal really wasn't necessarily to be a lawyer, it's actually to get a job. And it seemed like that would be a good path. Now, when I got to law school, I actually loved law school. And I went to the University of Chicago Law School, which is really an extraordinary place, in part because what you learn there really isn't what I think a lot of people think of as law school. Like, you don't learn the law. And that's like kind of like a bizarre twist. You learn of like what is the role of law in society. So you have to think about, and they're very interested in like, if you create a law, what are the economic consequences? What are the cultural consequences? What are the social consequences? So you really think about like how are structures of society formed and how does that produce outcomes in society? I thought that was really interesting. And having grown up in LA as an immigrant, I saw a lot of my friends' parents were somehow associated with the entertainment industry. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, is there a way to sort of like marry the fact that I'm from LA, there's this entertainment industry, I'm learning these legal skills, and I took all the classes you need to take to do entertainment law. And I did well in law school, and I was trying to find a job in entertainment, and a lot of like my connections who said they would open doors did not open doors. And which is good because you shouldn't be entitled and you shouldn't have expectations. And so that's a good lesson, but it's also a bad lesson because that meant I literally had to figure out stuff for myself. It so happens the same classes you need to do entertainment law are also the classes, like if you were interested in technology, you would also take. And I did a little bit of reflection, and the more I thought to myself, like, hey, I actually am much more interested in technology. And it's not necessarily like, I'm obviously not an engineer, I'm not a computer scientist, but like this intersection between how does technology push the law and how does law push technology? Technology is moving so fast, the law can barely keep up, and vice versa. I just found that exciting. I'm like, I don't really know what to do with it, but for the first time ever, I kind of found my calling. It's like somewhere at this intersection. And so that just said like, okay, you should begin your career somewhat at the intersection of technology and law, which is what I did. And I was really a technology lawyer for the first, like part of my career.
That's amazing. I love the story around how much you really enjoyed school. You enjoyed law school. And we talk about that so much with young people is like you really want to find something that you're passionate about and that you can really get in that sense of flow with and be able to lose track of time and find those subjects as early as possible in your career. And, that's one thing that we really push is, hey, if you could find subjects you really like at 14, 15, 16, you're going to be able to find a more fulfilling lifestyle for you. And so when you talk about your experiences in education and such, how did you end up finding these incredible companies before any of us did? Jared was lucky enough to get to go work at Spotify and Snapchat, and he was someone who was influential in building these, these unicorns, these decacorns of sorts because of your leadership. But when you joined, they weren't as sexy of companies as what they are today. Like, how did you discover them? What made you attracted to the startup scene?
There's luck. But there's luck in ways that people don't always think about, because if you like zoom out and look at like the macroeconomics and the cycles of certain industries, it just so happens that when I graduated college in the mid 90s, it was a really big boom for investment banking and the finance sector, period. And I lived in New York at the time. So a lot of people our age were really motivated to go down that path, somehow get involved in finance. But as I mentioned, my path was technology in New York. And if you had my interests of like being at the intersection of law and technology in San Francisco or Palo Alto or other parts of the world, there had been a lot of people with those interests. But to have those interests in New York at that time made you actually kind of a unicorn.
Yeah.
And frankly speaking, there were not a lot of opportunities to find those jobs. I got a little bit lucky because just as I was gaining some experience, like 4 or 5 years into my career, New York as an overall technology ecosystem started to gain steam. And one reason why it gained steam, I would say, is because of Google. And Google, which is obviously based in the Bay Area, its core business model is advertising. And the center of the advertising industry is in New York. And what it realized is to be a successful business, it would need to launch an office in New York, and it could attract the people who are connected to the advertising industry. And it did do that. But it also did something really smart. It said there's all these amazing engineers and computer scientists on the East Coast who go to like MIT or Carnegie Mellon or whatever, who would actually rather live in New York City than move to Palo Alto. And if you're one of those people and wanted to stay on the East Coast, your job would have been to go work at a bank or to go work in biotech or pharma. And Google's like, well, if we also created this great engineering center in New York, we might be able to attract that talent. And they succeeded. And so a few other more established or becoming more established tech companies started to open up these engineering hubs. And I think as those engineering hubs opened in New York, it really opened the door for tech, and which led to venture capitalists, which led to opportunities.
I love that. And it's so special to be able to understand how these ecosystems grew. One thing I think you have a really special perspective on being at these incredible companies is the founders, is the leaders, both Evan and Daniel, revolutionary founders. I definitely very much look up to both of them. Both are college dropouts. What do you think of that, and how they were able to show that, hey, they got into great schools, they learned enough, but then they wanted to run with that vision? Like, where do you think of the landscape of high school, college, etc.?
Well, for me, like my path through education, I've always attributed to like opening doors for me. But then when you meet a different group of people where it's not the formality of the education, it's actually the underlying values, being curious about the world, being entrepreneurial, like really trying to understand the environment. Two of the smartest people I've ever met, two of the most curious people, two of the most like intellectually like penetrating human beings I've ever met are Daniel and Evan. And, they can talk deeper on most subjects than people with PhDs because they've just like learned about the world. And I remember when I was at Spotify existed in only a handful of countries in the world and none of the major markets. And I went to the very first meeting at Spotify and I thought it was a music company. That's what I thought I was signing up for. And Daniel Ek, this is more than a decade ago, was talking about the future of quantum computing and how it's going to change the world and it's going to change healthcare and it's going to change all these different industries. And if we can like catch a sliver of it and apply it to machine learning, which I didn't know what it was, and AI back then to music, imagine this. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's thinking about the world in a completely different way. So the education plays a huge, huge role, but success can take many, many different forms. I think what's more important is like the curiosity and the interest in like learning about the world.
I agree. I think the falling in love with learning how to learn as quickly as possible, and that's why we're so passionate in general around high school. We feel whether it's right or wrong, there's still a huge stigma around if you don't complete high school. It's very difficult to be able to earn a living, whether it's in a high, professional white collar job or potentially directly into the workforce in construction and some other careers. All are a great opportunity to make money for your family. But getting a high school diploma is very important to that. Whereas college, it's very debatable right now, but we do believe, and I guess this applies to Evan more than Daniel just because Evan's from the States, is for instance, high school is what allowed him to get into Stanford. Being a Stanford dropout has a cachet to it, but your high school dictates what school you go to, and whether this is right or wrong, and I'm sure this is a hot topic, but what college you go to largely is more indicative than your GPA or your major. It's what college you got into as a signal to potential employers or if you're trying to raise venture capital. And so we're really excited to juxtapose that.
Well, on that note, one of like my good friends in New York City who dropped out of Princeton as a sophomore to start a company, and I was thinking to myself, the thing that's better than getting a Princeton diploma is being able to say you dropped out of Princeton to go start.
Yes, exactly.
That's even more exclusive.
Yeah, it's exclusive, the exclusivity, and we're all trying to create opportunities for more exclusivity, and whatever we can do to help students get that chance and that seat at the table at the job of their dreams or such. It really does all start with really taking care of your high school education, and so we're really passionate about that. And we're really passionate about being able to share stories of incredible leaders like yourself. And so the one thing I'd love to be able to end with is if you were to advise a high schooler, and you just went through this with your daughter, congratulations, shout out to his daughter, she's going to Cornell, incredible school. What would you do if you were in high school again or with your two younger daughters in terms of the taking your school seriously, but making sure that you really take care of yourself and have an incredible holistic life? How would you go about it?
I think you asked the question in the right way, which is maybe different than the way I did it even as a parent, which is high school matters a lot, and we're living in a society right now where a lot of people are taking steps just to get the kid into college. And we see this not just in school, we see this in sports. Like, how do I just get to the next level? And one of the disadvantages of that approach is not sort of enjoying the journey and learning it. And I think it's really important to take your academics seriously, but it's also important to like experience life. And I think if we can sort of deprogram society to be less aimed at checking the boxes of what college admissions officers want, but actually setting yourself up with like the intrinsic tools to allow you to fulfill your own potential, I think that would be better. It's hard to do that because people want to get into college, and I get that. But if you could somehow do both, I think you'd be better off.
Completely agree. Fall in love with learning, learn how to learn, and make sure that you learn how to learn about yourself. You have to know what you want in your life, and so the earlier you could take that seriously, the better. And we're so excited that we were able to have Jared on the show today, and we, hopefully we can have an episode 2 come sometime in the future. And thank you so much for everything that you've done for society. I'm a huge power user of both Snap and Spotify, and that was a huge testament to your ability to build, and we're really excited to call you a friend of the show. Thank you for joining us today, Jared.
Thank you for having me. I really
appreciate you. Thank you.